Right now, there's a crazy amount going on inside Cardano. We're getting closer and closer to the glacier drop, which will be the launch, eventually the launch of the Midnight Network. We're also in these early stages of seeing what it will look like if Cardano becomes the DeFi layer for Bitcoin, something that people in Bitcoin have dreamed about, having a meaningful DeFi layer, something they've dreamed about as long as I've been in crypto, going clear back to that 2013, 2014 period when when I got a hold of my first Bitcoin. This is something that's been talked about, having greater computation in Bitcoin in a meaningful way. There have been small attempts here and there, but nothing at the level we're talking about with a Cardano DeFi layer for the Bitcoin asset layer. On top of that, we're also seeing what decentralized governance really looks like on the ground in Cardano. No other cryptocurrency at the level of the Cardano blockchain has attempted or achieved so much in the direction of actual decentralized community governance as Cardano already has. And already we're seeing proposals to add new things to Cardano governance, maybe even an executive branch. A lot of big questions remain unanswered. But one of the most important questions in Cardano right now is probably something we all agree on. And that's that we've built this super sound foundation for all of these things we want to build in Cardano. And now's the time to pour gas on the fire. The big debate sort of looks like a multiple questions around what part of the fire we should pour the gas on. Which things deserve the gas? I think that's actually not the most important question. I think the most important question revolves around timing. When do we pour the most gas on the fire? And we're going to talk about it. If you strictly avoid anyone who talks about throwing gasoline on an open fire, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. We've got a lot to talk about. It's an exciting time in Cardano and in crypto. I know for a lot of you, it does not feel exciting at all. You're thinking to yourself, this is literally the least exciting time for me. And that's because we're in that part of the cycle where altcoins seem to do nothing. And it's probably exacerbated by a few things going on the macro front, the political front, all those things. But we're going to talk about why I think it's actually an exciting time in crypto right now, and especially in Cardano. But first, just a couple of quick notes. Where have I been? So if you've been around this channel for a while, you know occasionally I have to migrate to another part of the globe. Um, pretty far migration, but it's always kind of temporary. I go there, spend some amount of time, then I have to come back. So I just had to do that on very short notice for something very important, and it was one of those things that I absolutely had to do. It was 100% mandatory, so I had to go over there, take care of a bunch of stuff, come back. And a few people hit me up, tried to invite me to different things, not sort of some of them in real life, which I wouldn't have gone to anyways, to, so I didn't have to give up my real life identity. And some of them were other things. They just wanted me to do things online, that kind of thing. So I kind of had to explain to people that I was somewhere else on kind of a very short notice basis, but I didn't want to give people the exact details. I like to keep my identity, as obscured as I can. I'm not trying to be public. I like to be private, anonymous. I like to be anonymous. So, in order to maintain my anonymity, I told people I wanted to communicate to them that I was somewhere taking care of something important and that it was sort of on an emergency short notice basis, but I didn't want to tell them exactly what it was. So, I told them, hey, there are some red herrings in here. And then I told them I was doing something very important in that other part of the world. And I know at least two of the people I talked to who I told I'm going to include some red herrings to obscure my identity. I know they know each other, so they probably compared notes. And the first person was probably like, he told me this. And then the second person was like, he told me something completely different. And that was intentional. I'm not trying to mislead you guys. I just can't give out all the details or very specific details. So I gave you slightly different details about what I was doing on that short notice basis. Not trying to trick you or mislead you, but trying to include some red herrings just to maintain my anonymity. So forgive me for that, but I think I'm going to do that permanently. From now on, whenever people ask me a question and there's something I can tell them that will be helpful to answer their question, but I don't want to give up little bits of data that will eventually hurt my anonymity. I'm just going to start including red herrings, just spreading red herrings thoroughly throughout my communications. And I'm going to tell people I'm doing it so they don't think I'm lying to them when they eventually discover there's like conflicting information out there. Putting conflicting information out there about my identity is intentional. It's not to trick you or to do anything malicious. It's just to maintain my anonymity. Okay, so that was too much information about that, but I wanted to put that out there just so people know I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to maintain my anonymity through a little distribution of some red herrings here and there. More importantly, we've got a crazy amount going on in Cardano. And as always, Cardano, I'm just going to come out and say it. Cardano has been led all these years by a very passionate man who wears his heart on his sleeve. His name is Charles. We all know he's a passionate man who gets very excited about things. He's a passionate person. I'll put it that way. It's probably the best way to put it. And right now, over the last couple months, there have been a lot of things that he's been very excited and passionate about. A lot of them have to do with governance and where we're putting money, where he thinks we should be putting money, where other people think we should be putting money, where people think we shouldn't be putting money, how much money, all these kind of questions. I think my general thesis right now is that those are important questions, and we're going to hash it out through the process of governance, which is going to feel like a lot of conflict and drama, but really it's just the way governance is. But the more important question, I think we all agree we need to throw some gas on the fire. The more important question is when we throw gas on the fire. And I'm going to explain why. So I think we have a few things we all have to worry about. I don't think any of this changes that we're all in this together. We're all sort of in this Cardano thing together. We're all part of this community. We all want to drive forward. There's just some different time preferences we have, some different preferences as to allocation, and we got to hash all that out. That's what governance is for. But we all have a few things to worry about. We're all, no matter what we say, worried about the peak this year. And we're also all, I think, worried about the long-term success of the ecosystem. Sure, there's a few bad actors out there who probably don't give a damn about the long-term success of the ecosystem. But most of us, normal Cardano people, non-malicious, we probably care about these two things. Sure, we want to create a level economic playing field for the whole world and short circuit this whole central bank money printing thing. But let's be real, we also want to see those parabolic highs this cycle. And we want the Cardano ecosystem to be valuable long term. We're all, I think, trying to not round trip these cycles. We're all trying to maximize, our economic remuneration. And we're also all, I think, concerned about the long-term success of the ecosystem. Lately, there's been a lot of discussion. Okay, very spirited discussion. Okay, drama. There's been drama over how much we should spend this year out of the treasury and whether we should drop, substantial amounts of money on things like stablecoin liquidity. People are throwing around various numbers, $100 million. This has been framed by some people as a binary choice. Either you are pro growth and you agree to the instant spend of numbers that start to sound a lot like $500 million. If we think about some of the numbers we've been looking at as a community, we have the 350 million net change limit, but maybe the budget everybody's looking at is, 275 million or even something less than that. We had other net change limit proposals, the 200 million, and some of us are more conservative, think we should spend a little less. Some of us think we should spend a little more. Then we've got like this 100 million, allocation for stablecoin liquidity. That's a possibility. Then we've got whatever people want to spend on a sovereign wealth fund. Maybe that's 5% of the treasury or some other share of the treasury. So there's sort of that choice. When people frame this as a binary choice, they say, hey, we really need to throw gas on the fire. Let's spend money on all these things. Are you not accelerationist? Are you not pro Cardano? Don't you realize we've got to spend money if we're going to be taken seriously? Other ecosystems are spending these crazy amounts of money. We need to too if we're to be taken seriously. Or that's sort of the first binary choice when people frame this as a binary choice. And then the second choice is you are a greedy, anti-growth, fearmonger, who doesn't understand the OTC markets. This treasury ADA is going to be spent in the OTC markets. It won't really, impact the market. We've heard all these things. You've been following the discussion in Cardano. You've heard all of these things, and you've definitely seen people frame this as sort of an or choice, a stark contrast between the two. You're either in favor of spending this money, or you're this greedy anti-growth person who doesn't understand the OTC markets and doesn't understand that your personal holdings and your ability to sell at these parabolic highs won't be impacted by these sales on the OTC markets. I think it's more nuanced than this sort of binary black and white version of the world. There's also this thing called timing. This is year 4 of this 4-year cycle, and it's already July. Okay, I don't know if you're going to listen to this on the very last day of the first half of the year, the very last day of June, or if you're going to listen to this at the very start of July. But it's basically July either way. So we have less than 6 months or so left in this cycle, very roughly. Nobody really knows what the markets are going to do. This whole cycle may easily carry over into 2026. In fact, a lot of people are predicting exactly that. But we've got something on the order of like 6 months left, or if you prefer 9 months, or you think it's 4 months, some short number of months. Maybe it's even 12 months. Maybe it's much longer than you just think. But here's the problem. That's not enough time for anything we do right now to have a monstrous impact on this cycle. And here we're talking about that short-term thing. I, I said at the beginning, I think most of us who aren't malicious actors or bad actors, most of us are concerned about, what happens this cycle and the long-term success of the ecosystem. Right now, we're talking about this cycle, what's going to happen, which is of immediate, let's face it, immediate relevance to all of us who have holdings in this ecosystem. Even if we spend a full $500 million in the next 3 months, and I'm not trying to mischaracterize anybody's positions. I think everybody who's in favor of spending more as opposed to spending less would argue they're not really saying we're going to spend $500 million, but all these amounts people are talking about, they start to stack up and they start looking like something approaching $500 million. Maybe it's only 400 million, maybe it's 450, maybe it's, whatever number, but it starts looking a lot like $500 million. So even if we spend that amount of money, this full $500 million or whatever it is, in the next 3 months, the remaining months in the cycle don't even allow enough time for the average crypto participant to find out about it. Even if we're really quick, even if everybody all of a sudden agrees and we start grinding the gears of governance and we agree on everything in the next 3 months, we're all like, we're going full blast, we're throwing all the gas on the entire fire. Even if we get all that done in the next 3 months, which I think would be even unrealistic, even if we did that, there's not enough months left in the cycle for the average crypto person who would be a participant in the markets to even find out about it. Sure, all of us already in Cardano and paying close attention will know about it, but a few months isn't enough time for anybody else outside of us Cardano insiders to even find out about any of this stuff. The world is not made up of hyper-vigilant crypto fanatics checking the crypto news every 10 minutes on X and Reddit. It's made up of very passive, low information, recreational investors. That's what retail is. Low information, recreational investors. They don't think they're doing it recreationally, but it's kind of recreational what they're doing. I'm not saying that them losing money is recreational, but I'm saying a lot of the utility they get out of their investments could be characterized as more recreational than sort of like wise investing. That's most of the people, and they won't even hear about this stuff we're debating over a period of a few months. So that's why I think the question is really about timing. It's realistically going to take years for the beneficial effects of those extra hundreds of millions of ADA to show up. Even if we spend hundreds of millions of ADA on top of the budget that we've been talking about, it's going to take years for the beneficial effects of that extra money to show up because retail won't even know about it. It'll take years for them to even find out about it. So we might as well, and here's my argument, we might as well wait until after the highs this cycle, whatever they are, whatever the highs are going to be, we might as well wait until after those highs and just do it next year. And I've talked in the past about why I think spending outside of the fourth year of the cycle is smarter because there's all this hype. There's this influx of people who know there's a lot of money flying around during the last year of the cycle when the markets get hot, everybody's spending money on crypto, everything's going like gangbusters. A lot of people come in who aren't going to be there. They're here for the highs, they're not here for the lows. I think we don't optimize our spending on those people. We optimize our spending on the people who are here all the time. The people who are here for all 4 years of the cycle, because to build anything in crypto, you've got to be here for all 4 years of the cycle. Like, name something we all love and use all the time in Cardano that's been built and maintained by somebody who came in just for the parabolic highs and then disappeared forever. Sure, you might be able to name some tiny piece of infrastructure or something that might even be important, but the big lasting stuff that has an impact on these average low information retail investors, that stuff's not built by somebody who just comes in for the big parabolic highs, the big fourth year of the cycle, and then disappears. So I think there's an argument that spending outside of this fourth year of the cycle is smarter. And also, we don't have to worry about some other things like this influx of ADA onto the market. 2026 is only 5.5 months away at this point. It's really okay, 6 months away at this point. We can say it's 6 months away at this point. So why not wait just a few months to drop all that ADA on the market? The 2029 cycle peak is really the earliest market peak. Dropping this ADA on the market will have an impact anyway. Even if we spend all this ADA from the treasury, we give it to projects that we think are deserving, they're going to build stuff. And it's not really going to matter as far as like these big parabolic highs and optimizing those highs. It's not really going to matter until the 2029 cycle. And I'm not saying that anybody knows what the markets are going to do. Maybe this is the last year of the 4-year cycle. Maybe it all disappears because of the ETFs and all the institutional money in Wall Street entering the Wall Street herds, entering crypto. Maybe it's all over and there will be no more 4-year high. But so far, we've had this very distinct 4-year cycle in crypto. If that continues, nobody's saying it will. No guarantees here. Nobody knows. I don't know. Is it more likely or less likely? I have no idea. But if this 4-year cycle continues, the next cycle high where anything we build, anything we buy right now would even matter would be 2029. Why would we impact the market this year if it's not really going to help this year? Why not just wait these 6 months, Wait 6 months, do it after all the hype and hoopla of this fourth year of the cycle. Do it after this, let this cycle play out and do it after this cycle. So that's one side of the discussion. The other side of the discussion is that Midnight is launching this year, and we're also trying to entice all of the Bitcoin holders to make Cardano their DeFi layer. Obviously, dumping a bunch of liquidity into Cardano stable markets and funding projects at high magnitude levels would make that more attractive. Like, there's going to be a lot more hype around Midnight and a lot more hype around Cardano as the DeFi layer for Bitcoin if we dump a bunch of money into Cardano stablecoin markets, and we fund a bunch of projects with crazy amounts of money. Obviously, and here this might be the problem, obviously no one knows how the Midnight launch will actually go. Will people on the other chains actually care? Nobody really knows at this point. And there's also another issue. I hear influencers actually pretty routinely, but very recently, big influencers in crypto advising people straight up, not in relation to the glacier drop, but just in relation to airdrops writ large, not to participate in airdrops because there have been so many scams. And there will surely be scams, around the glacier drop. There will be people who try to steal money from other people, with either very crude or very sophisticated scams, around trying to capitalize on the glacier drop. That's going to happen for sure with the glacier drop, any airdrop really. But there have been so many scams with airdrops now. A lot of people are saying you shouldn't participate in any airdrop under any circumstances because it's too easy to get scammed. To hit the wrong button, you think you're you think you're participating in an airdrop and getting tokens for free. Really, what you're doing is executing a transaction that you don't want to execute. And I know the Midnight Glacier Drop, they're going to do everything possible to protect against all those kinds of malicious behavior. They're going to do everything they can to educate people so that people don't fall for those scams, to make it very clear, what's an official part of the Glacier Drop and what's not. I am very confident that the Midnight Glacier Drop, they're going to do everything they can to prevent all this, but it's still crypto. And so people who have large holdings on these other chains, these other ecosystems, they get to participate in the Glacier Drop, they might be kind of hesitant to do it just because there have been so many scams in crypto. You got to remember, the rest of crypto basically is the robbery forest. We have done much better than that in Cardano, but the rest of the ecosystems, they've been living in the robbery forest all this time. So they're going to be very skeptical. I mean, some people are going to be very skeptical of an airdrop. I hope not. I hope that's not the case. But I know a lot of people are pretty afraid. By 2025, a lot of people have become pretty afraid of airdrops because it's so easy to click the wrong button and execute a transaction you don't want to. We also know that Charles is a very passionate guy. He's probably spending a lot of time thinking right now about how to optimize that Glacier drop, that midnight launch, just like he's been probably spending a lot of time for the last several years since the announcement of midnight. And before that, since the birth of midnight, since he first thought of midnight, I'm sure he's been spending a lot of time thinking about how to optimize the launch of this network. Charles is a passionate guy. And if I were him, I'd probably be losing sleep right now, worrying about all these things with the launch of the Midnight Network. I'd be doing everything I possibly could to optimize that launch and to prepare for that launch. So it makes sense that if you were Charles, you would be trying to make sure there's sufficient liquidity inside the Cardano ecosystem, that projects inside the Cardano ecosystem are getting funded to a certain extent, to certain levels. It makes sense you'd be in favor of all those things because as much as we have all this rhetoric about Midnight being a totally separate network, it is sort of intrinsically tied to this ecosystem. I mean, if you're going to say that Midnight is intrinsically tied to one ecosystem, for sure, it's Cardano. Cardano is a big part of Midnight, and I think Cardano being in good shape is going to have a huge impact on how well Midnight does. The same can be said for this whole Cardano as Bitcoin DeFi layer plan, this whole development, this whole innovation that seems to be happening. The same thing can be said there. That one, Cardano as the Bitcoin DeFi layer, is probably going to be the big narrative of this cycle for Cardano. Midnight's going to be important, but the big narrative that people in the larger crypto landscape are going to care about is whether or not Cardano is going to end up being the DeFi layer for Bitcoin, because that's a really big deal. That's almost if it happened in a very successful way, that would almost be a historic development in the history of crypto. But you have to ask a certain question here. How much do these types of narratives actually matter? How much do they actually matter for the success of our ecosystem? So, the success of our ecosystem on a short-term basis. So you could argue that we should dump all the money on as many things as possible right now because narratives matter, and that's going to be those are going to be the big narratives for this cycle. But the question you have to ask is, how much do these narratives really matter in the short term? Obviously, they help make the difference between a Cardano near the top of the charts and something like the number 90 or number 290 crypto asset. What I'm saying is that there's obviously a reason that Cardano sits right here, still in the top 10, albeit barely, but still in the top 10. Cardano sits clear up here rather than being on page 96 of this list. There are a lot of crypto projects in this list at CMC that got a lot of publicity when they launched and sometimes for years after they launched. And they're not in the same place as Cardano. And a lot of that is due to narratives, the narratives around Cardano's technology. And when I use the word narrative, I'm not saying that pejoratively. I'm saying there's a certain story that we can tell about the technology and the community, everything that's involved in Cardano that's just not existent in a lot of these other crypto projects. But then at the same time, you can look at charts like this one that Raoul Pal is famous for, and you could come to the conclusion that maybe narratives don't matter as much as we would like to believe. So this is kind of the famous global liquidity M2 versus Bitcoin chart. And the argument being made by people like Raoul Pal is that 89% of all of Bitcoin's price action is defined by global liquidity. Looking at charts like this, I think most of us could be pretty easily persuaded that by far the biggest needle mover, at least in crypto, and this chart is Bitcoin, but let's face it, where Bitcoin goes, so does crypto. The biggest needle mover in crypto, at least, is liquidity, and the other narratives basically don't matter at all. You could be excused for coming to that conclusion. And in fact, maybe that conclusion has the most data behind it. But like I explained earlier, there are obviously some narratives other than liquidity that determine the difference between top 10 crypto assets like Cardano and the number 200 asset or the number 2000 asset. So no matter what you believe about what actually moves crypto markets, if you think it's all just liquidity, which is pretty persuasive, I got to admit, I think there are certain things we can say. No matter what you think actually moves the markets, I think there are certain things we can say are probably true. From my perspective, at least, they're probably true. Liquidity is probably the real driver of the entire crypto space, while other narratives around technology, strategy, and etc. probably go more toward determining your ecosystem's share of the whole crypto market, whether you're number 10 with that share of the crypto market or you're number 2000 with that tiny sliver of the crypto market. Three, normal people really aren't as dialed into any of this latest crypto news as us crypto diehards. Let's face it, most of the market is going to be recreational retail investors. And I'm not making fun of them by calling them recreational. I'm just saying they're not spending nearly as many hours consuming news about crypto as the likes of us. If you're listening to this channel, you probably fit in that crypto diehard segment. Most of retail, they're not like us. They're not consuming this news. They're not going to hear about any of these things, any of these narratives. They might hear at a very high level, but it's going to take time for that to filter down to them. It takes a lot of time. The effect, number four, the effect of narratives other than liquidity probably take years instead of months to trickle down to normal crypto participants. So for me, the upshot is why rush? We haven't had this level of intensity around these topics that we're very hotly debating right now inside Cardano in any of the last 3 years of this cycle. Sure, we had plenty of drama. We always have plenty of drama over the last 3 years of this 4-year cycle. There were other things we were very dramatic about, but all of a sudden, we're the focal point of all the intense spirited conversation, all the big debates are around how much money we should be spending. And my feeling is, why should we rush? The last 7 years of Cardano, we haven't really been debating these same topics with anywhere near the same level of intensity. And we've done just fine over the last 7 years of Cardano, but we haven't been having these big debates. Should we pour these levels of money onto these ecosystems? IO spent a lot of money. Charles and Input Output certainly spent a lot of money on this ecosystem, but we haven't been debating for the last 7 years. Hey, should we spend 100 million out of the treasury on X thing? That hasn't been the nature of the debate. there were people thinking about it, but we haven't been debating it at this level of intensity. And so my question is the fourth year of this cycle the right time to conclude that debate? Or would it not kill us to just wait 6 months, wait for this fourth year of the cycle to subside? Would it somehow be cataclysmic for us to just wait, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it's going to be? But then again, I'm not a project wanting to get some of that treasury ADA. I'm not a project wanting to get some of that treasury ADA so that I could sell it into those cycle highs. I'm also not a party about to launch a chain that would be complementary to Cardano. So I have very different motivations than those kinds of projects. If I was one of those projects, it would certainly be in my interest for that liquidity to drop now and not in 6 or 12 months. I would want to get that treasury ADA inside my project so that I could sell into these 4-year cycle highs if they are to happen this year, if they are to be highs, if there are parabolic highs. I keep maintaining no one knows what the market's going to do. But if it follows this 4-year pattern we've seen, this would be the year. And if I was a project who was on deck to get some of that data, I would want to get it this year and not next year so that I could sell into the highs. To be clear, I'm not blaming those types of parties in any way. They're just being rational. They're literally doing the rational thing. Of course, it's better for them if the treasury drops happen now instead of next year. They're just being smart and logical. They're doing the smart thing. They're doing what I expect them to do. But I'm actually not in their shoes. I'm not one of those parties who's on deck to get some of the treasury money, and neither is the vast majority of the community. The vast majority of you listening are not in those shoes. Some of you are. Some of you are on deck to get some of that ADA treasury money, and that's good. It's not bad that you have contributed enough to the ecosystem or have a good enough idea or have a good enough team. However you got into the budget, good for you. Nobody's blaming you. And if you are trying to get that money now instead of next year, that's perfectly smart and logical. Also, no one's blaming you for that. But for all of us who aren't in those shoes, it's also rational and logical to say, wait a second, why can't we do this in 6 months? Why does it have to be right now before the cycle highs? And if it is to be right now before the cycle highs, why is it that every single proposal is priced as if that ADA is going to be sold at 50 cents per ADA instead of being adjusted for whatever the chances are of these possible parabolic highs? I mean, I think the rational thing would be to say, hey, there's X% chance of the parabolic highs being this. And of course, nobody knows the answer. Nobody knows what those numbers are. But it seems like the logical thing would be that there should be a concept of, hey, the highs this year probably aren't going to be, if they're going to be highs, by definition, they're not going to be 50 cents per ADA. So if people think there are going to be highs this year or in the next 12 months or anything like that, if you think that there are going to be highs, then by definition, that high is not going to be 50 cents per ADA. So the price that these projects would sell the ADA at probably wouldn't be 50 cents per ADA if you're in that camp. This is how governance works. Every party needs to advocate for and voice whatever they perceive as the best path forward given their position and perspective. For those projects that are trying to get some treasury ADA, they should be advocating for treasury withdrawals now. But some of us who aren't on deck to receive that treasury ADA, if we're just normal people in the ecosystem like me and most of you, it's also normal for us in governance to advocate for something that aligns more with our perspective. And maybe that's that those withdrawals shouldn't be made until 2026. It's not anything personal, it's just enlightened self-interest and reality given short-term and long-term goals and priorities. And truth be told, you could argue that it's also in the best interest of everybody who's a normal participant in the ecosystem, not on deck to get ADA treasury money, to drop that money now, to withdraw all the money, inject it into the ecosystem now. You could easily make that argument. I think there are persuasive arguments that could be made there. But you could also make the argument, it won't be cataclysmic. And in fact, it might even be good if we waited till 2026. Everybody wants to sell into the cycle highs. Projects who might get some treasury data want to sell into the cycle highs. Regular people in the ecosystem want to sell into the cycle highs. But the timing of these treasury withdrawals will could impact who gets what price. I know we're going back to the whole, if you sell into the OTC markets, then it won't impact market price argument. And there's some persuasive ideas around that argument. But also, is every project we give money to going to sell into the OTC markets, or are some of them just going to sell it on the open markets? I'm going to argue that it's not going to be this organized, unified effort, and some of them are just going to sell onto the open markets. I think we know that of all the projects that would get money in these withdrawals from the ADA Treasury, some of them at least are going to sell into the open markets. So I think everybody, given their position, whether they're getting some of this money or they're not, is going to advocate for their own best position. They're going to advocate for something that aligns with their own perspective. And we're going to decide either to disperse that money now or later. But then when the dust settles for this cycle, when this cycle is all over, all the hype and hoopla, when that's all subsided, we're all going to do what we've always done in crypto at the end of every single one of these cycles. We all sort of reset and we work together during the crypto winters and the crypto lows and the bottom of that trough. We all sort of we reset and we all work together to be back in the best possible position for the next fourth year of the 4-year cycle. In this case, that'd be 2029 and beyond. That's what's going to happen regardless of what decisions we make. There's going to be a high in Cardano at some point in the future. And then, unless we have this super cycle, this mythical super cycle everybody talks about, if the current pattern continues, there's going to be a high, and then we're going to have more downward action. We're all going to kind of reset, and we're going to start working toward the next highs. That's been the reality of the crypto markets so far. It hasn't ever been this mythical super cycle that everybody's talked about every single cycle. So basically, what I'm saying is it's perfectly logical and normal that people playing different roles in the Cardano ecosystem are going to advocate for different things. There's going to be debate and discussion, just like Lockheed Martin might certainly have a different position on how big the US defense budget should be versus your average taxpayer. Lockheed Martin wants the Department of Defense to spend as much money as possible in 2025. Spend the money now. They want to build crazy planes and get billions and billions and billions of dollars, whereas your average taxpayer, they may want the defense budget to be slightly smaller. They might have more incentive to spend slightly less because they're kind of an owner of the US Treasury, just like the average Cardano community member is kind of an owner of the Cardano Treasury. They might have a different perspective than some project who would be on the receiving end of those disbursements. That's perfectly normal. I don't think either party should be blamed for advocating for their position, but also neither party is really evil or stupid or malicious. Both sides will claim that, or greedy. Both sides will claim that. That's not really the issue. They just have different time preferences. They're playing different roles, different incentives, different end results will impact them differently. And we can debate all the minutia around that, but that's just governance. This is what governance is going to be forever in every government that will ever be created. And I think that's okay. Things are going great in the Cardano ecosystem. We're just experiencing everything that happens in a real community of human beings trying to engage in this shared venture that is the Cardano ecosystem. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you're getting ready for a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.